This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski with Children Come First on WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. talking about children, education, families, preventative health, and everything surrounding a child's life. We're here this morning with Dr. Christina Dawson from the Virginia Polytech Institute in Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Tina has an incredible background in child development, family development. She also has worked in environmental education communities, in developing a sense of community. She was director of the community school in Virginia, president of the Learning Circle, and she's been adjunct faculty member at Radford University and now at Polytech. And Christina, this morning I'd like to talk a little bit about, tell us a little bit about your background in your degree in child development and family and child development. I don't think I've ever heard of that degree before. What does it entail?
Originally,
is it a teaching degree?
Was preparation for people who wanted to work in child care centers or in family services. And most of the coursework was based around the social, psychological, and physical development of children through adolescence, and then there's also adult development and the implications for learning at all those different ages.
All right, you're president of the Learning Circle. What's the Learning Circle?
The Learning Circle is an umbrella nonprofit corporation that grew out of the environmental education program that we had at community school, and the first program that we operated under the Learning Circle's umbrella was Expedition Field Studies, and that's a program that takes students traveling either out in the mountains around in local southwestern Virginia. We've taken children on trips to the Pacific Northwest for extended backpacking trips as well.
Where's the community school?
Community school was originally founded in 1971, and it's one of the oldest, and occasionally it's also recorded as the largest alternative community school in the country, at least on the East Coast. And
how large is large?
It's had up to 160 some students, and it's was founded originally out of the progressive education movement and partially out of the alternative movement of the late 60s, founded by a handful of parents and students who were dissatisfied with the conventional educational opportunities available in the Roanoke Valley at the time.
Now, most people don't know what the progressive education movement is.
Okay. That one of the, well, from my background, I use John Dewey, Jean Piaget, and folks like that, basically where it's child-centered, and what the term they use these days is constructivism, and where the children and the teachers and then also family members, everybody who's actively involved in the daily life of the school, helps create the curriculum and the learning experiences in which people are involved.
So this, in the schools, in the community school, in the progressive schools, then there is no set curriculum and curriculum textbooks. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, that's right. Basically, the curriculum is considered everything that happens to the student within and connected to the school environment, and not just the instructional materials. And at least in community schools interpretation, there was always a theme, and actually there still is. The school still exists. I'm just not there at this point. There's a theme every year around which the students' activities are planned, and the way that theme is constructed is that the previous spring, the students and the teachers generate particular topics. Over the summer, the teachers agree on an overall focus, and then each class interprets that focus a little differently. For example, this year, the Spanish teacher, who's been at community school for probably about 12 years now, is originally from Bolivia, And so they created an international Spanish language speaking theme, and each class was the Casa de whomever, and they created different names. They did an exchange program with with some students in Bolivia, and tied in a lot of the experiences that the students had around an international education theme.
That sounds exciting. I mean, that sounds like an exciting curriculum for students to be able to learn. Now, you're with the Virginia Polytech Institute, and you're head of the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. Is that correct?
I'm
part professor?
Yeah, I'm visiting assistant professor at this point.
Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about time and travel with regard to the school community. Can you give us examples and a little bit of information regarding that aspect?
You mean related to involving students in the local community within which the school is located?
Yes.
Okay.
Both within the community and outside of the community.
Okay.
We can do both of those.
Well, one of the ways to look at it is to community education and its different interpretations. And one of the more recent interpretations of community education is to have after-school programs and things like that. My understanding of community education is a little bit broader than that, and I like to consider the walls of the school as fairly porous, where you invite the community and the members of the community in, and you take the students and the faculty of the school out into the community. And basically, again, you can look at problems that exist within the community or issues that might come up with some of the, again, in taking community school as an example, one of the local traditionally African-American communities called Gainsborough was being threatened by development, and some of the members of that community were working on chronicling the historic importance of the community, inventorying some of the buildings and things like that. And community schools, middle school students got very involved with that, went out and did oral history interviews with some of the members, did local architecture, and eventually helped the members of the community make a presentation to the local city council, working on getting historic preservation consideration for some of the buildings in the district. Now, the time management aspect of those kinds of projects, depending on the school, a community school, and then also at Mountain Community High School, which is one of the programs that the Learning Circle operates, basically Fridays do not have traditional classes scheduled, and it's an open day devoted to exploration, community work, internships, those kinds of things. So actually going out into the community, participating in field work would be particularly available on that day, and leading up to that day in most of the other classes in which the students are involved as much as possible would be the research, the writing, the studying, the preparation work. And that's when you might involve the local community members, asking them to come in as speakers, guest educators, those kinds of things.
Now, do the students have to learn core curriculum in your schools, and do they have standards of learning? And
well, since we're located in Virginia, we have in the past used the standards of learning as I guess relatively minimal guidelines. We are not, the independent schools with which I've worked are not subject to the assessment piece and the testing requirements. We have found that when most of the students transfer, because most of them do go into public schools somewhere along the line, that as long as we have prepared them to learn how to take time tests and how to deal with the standardized issues, filling in the dots and all those kinds of things, that it tends not to be a problem for those students. But as far as over time, what we found is that we usually cover the skills. We may not cover exactly the same content that they might be experiencing in a more conventional setting, but they do achieve most of the goals and the skills in which they would be assessed or which they would need to be successful in another setting.
Now, you said your walls are porous.
Mm-hmm.
The walls of a school could be porous, and I've often spoken about the educational structure of schools as what I call the Mary Tyler Moore model. And the last episode of Mary Tyler Moore, the whole group did a group hug.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone sneezed or needed a tissue, and the whole entire group moved to get the tissue. And then when the tissue was retrieved, they all moved back together again. And I consider that what I call the Mary Tyler Moore structure of education today. What happens is when legislatures make legislation, it impedes on the external structure of the school, but literally just moves it from one place to another, or school district policies move it from one place to another, or follow the flow of money moves it to another. But the internal structure really never changes, and I've been saying for years is that we need exactly what you said, a fluid or a porous structure where we are part and parcel of the community and become participants in the community. How can you help talk to the people who are listening to this program today to be able to start doing something in their communities to make their external structure become more porous? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, part of what I see happening in at least some of the local schools around here in the public system is that they're having more time in the building available to others in the community. They've either have very nice computer labs, which they've made accessible to at least to family members and sometimes to other locals. The recreation departments have sometimes contracted with the schools to use the gym, so that there's at least some more ownership and investment in the facility, and people don't see that as quite separate. The other way that's happening, and again, this is somewhat driven by financial issues, is that a lot of the public schools in particular are developing partnerships with local community agencies or local businesses to support particular aspects of their programming. And a lot of times it just takes a teacher to look at a piece of the curriculum or what they're doing in their classroom and say, okay, how does this connect with the world outside? And it can be even one of the requirements in high school is to learn technical writing or some aspect of journalism. Well, that would very easily lead to making connections with an advertising agency, a local newspaper, and involving individuals from those places, bringing them into the classroom, and then trying to work an arrangement where the students can go out and see the places where these people work and participate in a real life activity, rather than just doing a school newspaper to actually write some articles that are intended for the school newspaper, but then are also submitted to the local community paper and perhaps get published there as well.
You are listening to Children Come First, WAAT. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, 7:50 a.m. on your radio dial. We are talking today with Dr. Christina Dawson from Virginia Polytech Institute. And we have been talking about time and how we use our time in terms of community in our schools. Would you consider, Tina, the mandatory community service for all public schools as a way of helping school districts to become more porous and become more fluid?
To some extent. I know there's a debate going on if it's mandatory, then is it really service? I guess what I've found is by strongly encouraging children to take that step and to get out into the world, that once they've done it, they find, at least the students with whom I've worked, have found a lot of satisfaction and really have developed great enthusiasm for going out and trying different things. And and yes, then there's a more positive connection between other folks in the community and the school and the students. And at different times, especially when we've worked internships or apprenticeships, and then invited all of the adults for a particular group back, and includes the family members, and asked the students to give mini presentations on their experiences and the kinds of things they did and what they got from that. That's generated a lot of positive feeling, a positive interaction, and then the community members have extended invitations to students from other groups, from other years in the program, to participate in something similar, and they've mentioned it to their friends and colleagues in other situations. And so that's a way to start making connections that may not have been made otherwise. And it also gets people feeling more positive about the students in the school. This particularly has been helpful for middle schoolers and high schoolers, because lots of folks in the haven't had necessarily positive impressions or interactions with students of that age. But middle schoolers in particular really want to make a difference, and they really want to have positive interactions and feel like they're contributing something. And if they get these real experiences, then it's helpful to them, and it helps create a more positive impression and knowledge of what teenagers really can do for folks who aren't involved traditionally with the schools.
Well, I was thinking in terms of the fact that many times changes don't occur unless there's legislation involving it, and I can just imagine going into a classroom and telling a principal, telling teachers, well, now you have to do 30 hours of community service. Your students have to do 30 hours of community service, and they're pulling out their hair and saying, where am I going to find time? However, when it's legislated, 30 to 100 hours of community service a year, then perhaps we find the time. It seems that when it's imposed on us, now I could be wrong about that, but it seems to be the way change occurs, and because change is difficult for most people.
Yeah, different states have tried different things, and I know in Maryland, part of the graduation requirements include mandatory community service. And in the public school systems in our area, particularly if students participating in an honors program or an international baccalaureate program, then community service has been required. Usually what I've found is that a lot of times, especially the more enthusiastic teachers, have some community interest in some outside project with which they've been dealing. And if they can share that enthusiasm with their students and at least start out having their connected and involved with that, then when the students see that enthusiasm and experience that, then they're also more likely to go out and pick and choose projects of their own. And I think that those kinds of things have been illustrated anywhere from one of the elementary schools in Washington State, and I can't pull it which one right now, helped reclaim a salmon spawning stream. And that was particularly one of their science teachers' interests, and so it started with a particular class and basically became a whole school project, and that the school's learnings about water and the environment and how to do reclamation activities just grew and spread, and now it's a continuing project over several years. And it didn't start out as mandatory. It started out because one person was extremely enthusiastic and could convince not only the students but the local school administration to free up the time.
Well, for those legislators who are listening, it seems to be, and taxpayers, it seems to be an logical return on the investment of a taxpayer dollar for a child to become part of the community. I mean, education seems to be insulated and isolated in a bubble.
Yeah.
Where a child goes to school, there's no real world cause and effect. There's no real life experiences. And when they become part of the community and must work in the community as part of that educational process, then I think the barriers and the walls begin to break down. And who knows, as you said, the impetus of one may create much for the rest of the community, rest of the school.
Yeah. Yeah, the metaphor that we tend to use, and I think it was William Carr, and unfortunately I can't remember what year, used to describe the school as existing on an island, and each morning the drawbridge to the island was dropped, and the children went over there and spent their day on the island, and then in the evenings they came back home and the drawbridge was raised and the school existed separately. And in a lot of cases, I'm not too sure that we've moved beyond that metaphor, although I'm optimistic that we are, especially for local schools that have looked at different reform models. Some of the elementary schools here are looking at Boyer's Basic School and trying to incorporate that, and that involves a lot of community participation, both within creating families and a feeling of community within the school, and then looking at how to involve community others who have not traditionally been involved in the school systems.
Is there a book on Boyer's Basic School?
Pardon?
Is there some literature that our
Yeah, there's actually
readers...
a book called The Basic School that Ernest Boyer wrote before his death.
Okay, and are there any other ones to help parents?
There's another one that Carnegie put out that's in cooperation with secondary principal, called Breaking Ranks.
Breaking Ranks? And who was that by?
Again, Ernest Boyer's name's attached to it, and I can't pull it right now. I should be able to turn around and look at my bookshelf and find it, but I cannot do that right now.
Okay, so Breaking Ranks is another book. And
then a lot of the publications by the National Middle School Association that are talking about the ideal middle school model, when they originally were talking about that community involvement, particularly looking at how to have the students feel that there was meaning in their lives.
Now, hasn't there been a lot of literature written against the middle school movement in very recent times? And how
it depends on how you
worked?
interpret the middle school movement. Some folks have said that that not a lot of learning is going to occur under the middle school movement because it's
basically review.
Right. But what I've found is that if the middle schools are appropriately structured, I suppose, and that you're taking the items in the curriculum and really creating, again, it's just modifying what people in a lot of places have been doing at the elementary level, thematically based instruction, experiential education, and taking it and creating just a little more challenge for the middle school level, looking at the fact that the brain development is not stagnant, it's just different, and that you have to take more of the social-emotional aspects into account as you're planning the curriculum and the experiences for the middle school child.
Well, it would seem that in our successful community schools around the country, they have demonstrated that the middle school, in fact, is not a necessary structure for us to look at, because most of the schools that are successful are K-8.
Right.
And also,
right.
And then on to high school, or even K-12, many of them are.
Yeah, and actually, I guess, and I tend to speak or to work with students, and I always say the equivalent of so-and-so grades, or looking at what might be appropriate for students in approximately these age ranges. And my experience has mostly been working in either K-8 schools or around here, because some of the smaller school divisions also have 8 to 12 high school programs, which gets a little fuzzy. But if you look at making what the students are involved with meaningful and connecting it to something that they see has a purpose, then it really doesn't matter how old they are, what age range you're working with. That it's not just learning something to regurgitate facts or to have it on a particular test. It's to make a difference and to connect. I think that all of us are looking to make connections and to understand the relationships between and among things, whether it's cognitive things or natural environment things or community-based things. And when you can coordinate all the different activities, then education is meaningful and appropriate no matter what age ranges.
Well, it's that's very interesting. One of the reports that I read regarding the middle school movement was the fact that this is the time of puberty when children need to learn the transition between childhood and adult years, and rather than being guided and mentored and interned by an adult, they are in fact having that void filled by having their peers become the mentor, become the intern, and the fact that the continuum in that process is devoid of adults, transitioning them from the expectations and as they did in traditional cultures with students who became children, who went from childhood to teenage years to adulthood. We seem to be missing that aspect in our schools today.
There's some mixed literature on the influence of peers and adults, and what I've found is that the students, the group is very important. A sense of belonging to a group at any age range is important, but particularly in the middle school level and early adolescence, a sense of belonging takes precedence. And so if the only group out there that seems interesting is a peer group of some kind, then that's where the students will go. But if there's something interesting and intriguing of a multi-age range where students of various ages and adults of various ages and walks of life are involved in various projects, then that's the group that the students will find attractive. And in the long run, there are going to be some periods of life where you have very intense interactions with your age peers, but in most of life you'll find that you're dealing with a variety of ages, a variety of backgrounds. So one of the constraints around anything like gradedness in schools, or particularly only having students of certain ages interact with one another, is that you miss the richness and really the reality base of learning how to deal with different people in different aspects.
Well, you are listening to WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. Today we're visiting with Dr. Tina Dawson from the Virginia Polytech Institute and State University in Virginia. And we will be returning in a few moments after we listen to our sponsors and talking about children and raising children in the 21st century, and especially our educational system. So please join us after a few moments with our second half hour and Dr. Tina Dawson from the Virginia Polytech Institute.
Outside our door. The other piece is that we spend a lot of time trying to get the children to understand the local community and the local environment, and then we also want them to have an experience of other cultures and other environments. So we have taken to traveling within the broader context of Virginia and then also within the broader context of the United States. Although we've also taken children now to Mexico and Canada. And so to and these trips range from anywhere from a week to, if we're going very far away geographically, we've taken as much as a month. And the students study the locale where the trip is going to be, and also the native cultures and perhaps some of the local economic and other aspects of the location. And each student becomes an expert on one aspect of where they're going. And that's, at least as far as the expedition field trips, and particularly this applies to the middle school program, the community school, and the expedition field studies program. And the students learn anything from how to take care of gear and backpacking or canoeing equipment to different native cultures, to different flora and fauna they're going to experience, those kinds of things. And depending on when the trips are scheduled, then trip prep is either something that happens regularly on a once-a-week basis, or it's something that happens pretty intensely in a couple of weeks. For example, the most recent trip on which we've taken a group of students was to the Pacific Northwest, with the last week of that trip being at the National Coalition of Alternative Community Schools Conference in Colorado. So a few of the students went on the long trip and all the way out to the Pacific Northwest, and then the bulk of the rest of the school, at least, met them in Colorado and was at the conference for the week. The students who went to Pacific Northwest have been preparing really for most of the year, but fairly intensively since the end of January, reading some shared readings about the Pacific Northwest, and then picking individual topics to do research and to prepare presentations. One of the students decided to look at the dance of the local cultures, and then to schedule some museum visits and some performance visits while they were out there. They also went backpacking along the Olympic coast for a week, and one of the students had studied the tidal environments and could explain the different tidal environments to the other students on the trip and to the adults as well. And then
I'm sure I have teachers and parents cringing at things like how much did this cost, and liability, and
right.
I mean, I could just hear it all now.
Yes, the field trips are always somewhat. That's why we start.
Especially when you're talking about backpacking and spending a whole month on the road.
Yeah. We've started, and again, of course, the trip costs do vary depending on where we're going. When we take the students down for a week in the local mountains and things like that, then really it's just, we have now quite a collection of group gear. There's some things, of course, that have to be purchased individually on a student-by-student basis, although we have some loaner equipment. And, you know, those trips might cost, say, $200, $250 for the week inclusive, and that does help us cover the insurance costs, which we've had to purchase pretty, you know, you get special travel insurance when you run these kinds of programs. And we always have the emergency medical treatment forms, and the parents have to sign various permission slips and things like that.
What ages do you take with you, and how many children and adults?
On the more extended trips, we have taken children as young as, let me think, probably 12, but most often it's 14 years of age and older. and the adult-student ratio is usually 1 to 4, and sometimes it's 1 to 2 or 3.
And how many students?
And most of the places that we go, especially if we're going on a wilderness trip, you can't take more than 10 people into those areas, so it's 8 students and 2 adults. Although it can vary. Also, that's a function of how much gear and equipment our van can hold.
Okay, so now how is the trip paid for? The students raise the money themselves?
Depending on in the independent schools in which we've been involved, then for the full-time students, the trips have been part of the tuition, and we geared that around that because we really thought the trips were such an integral and important part that we built them into the tuition costs for the school.
I noticed that a lot of the progressive schools and the alternative schools all have travel as part of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that so important?
Because it's so important to having shared stories, shared experiences, creating a sense of community. Also the individual challenge of seeing how each student, how you as a young person learns how to interact with the unknown and with other people in a fairly
adventurous,
but also fairly intense setting. I mean, some of the hardest parts for the students are actually the van trips, being together in a van for an extended period of time and learning how to deal with the squabbles and the sharing and the needs of individuals, even to agreeing on, what music you're going to listen to for how long.
Well, someone once told me when I ever decide to get married that I should take the person on a very long trip with my children, and then I'll know for sure whether or not we can survive together.
And that is, now we found that particularly when we start with younger students and they kind of grow up in this environment, by the time they get to the extended trips, it's still challenging, but it's not as problematic for perhaps students who have never had this kind of experience before, and suddenly they're 16 and they're going out on a van with a bunch of relative strangers, but not necessarily, and trying to figure out how to get along when everybody else's comfort depends on each person. You're very dependent on one another. Everybody's very responsible to each other, and it's a great learning experience, and it's not, you have to have some glitches along the way that you deal with, but when you come back, the shared experiences and the shared stories have really the sense of belonging. And remember when we were out on the beach and it was pouring down rain and we had to hole up, we almost got caught by the tide, and then we saw this beautiful thing, and just all those kinds of things. The challenges that were successfully met and the challenges which they would probably address a different way the next time, that kind of experience and the building that takes place through those are just incredible. And what we're also hoping is then that the students want to plan and experience those kinds of things outside of school when it's not something that's part of their school experience. We have several alumni from community school in particular, because that's where I was for the longest time, who regularly plan backpacking or canoeing trips, and off and on, and they're in college at least now, and off and on they call and say, we're going to go do such and such, would you or Mike be able to join us? Or can we at least borrow some of your gear?
Yeah, that's much more like it. You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We are here at WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. Today we're speaking with Dr. Christina Dawson from Virginia Polytech Institute and State University in Virginia. We've been talking about the different ways learning takes place and in non-traditional ways. And Tina, I know you do a leadership training for principals at Virginia Polytech. One of the areas that's really lacking in we do a lot of micromanaging at all levels, from the school board level, superintendent's level, principals, even all the way down to the teacher, to the students. How do you prepare principals in leadership training? What kinds of academic courses do they take in order to be leaders, and knowing the background that you have in the community schools?
Well, at Virginia Tech, we have what we call a preparation program, and through the program, they can become licensed or certified, and we make sure they meet those requirements, but that's not our primary goal. Our primary goal is preparing instructional leaders and folks who can create and facilitate school communities and appropriate learning environments for everyone involved. Now, so we have an introductory class, I suppose, that's called the Principalship, Change, and Leadership. And we have the students, these are traditionally students who have been teaching for anywhere from 3 to 23 years, and now they would like to become principals. And we spend a lot of time having them learn and talk about themselves as leaders and why they react to certain situations the way they do. We do a lot of instruments on learning styles, personality types, leadership inventories, so they can see that there's lots of different ways that people process information and hopefully try to understand why people react differently to sets of information than they themselves do. We also look at what the change process is or can be, and how change, what the barriers and are to change, and how to create places where it's safe to take risks and to fail and to learn from those experiences. And we try to create, we spend a lot of time on group roles, team membership, and we try to do that within the program and in our classroom so that they can experience it for themselves and then try to take some of that back and at least try it out in their classrooms and then see how it might work in their school settings. We're very fortunate in that we accept students on a cohort basis, and they're with us for 24 months continuously. And they're taking usually a course a semester and also doing a field-based experience all along. We usually have them doing an internship experience with a practicing administrator. Say if our courses start in August, by November, they're already, they've had some experiences out in the field, and then they're going to continue that throughout the rest of the program. And we also have mentor training, where we bring those mentors in and talk to them about the goals of our program and what kinds of things we're looking for our interns to experience. And then we ask them to talk about some of the realities of being in a school day to day. Most of the people come to the program because they want to change something. They feel that they've contributed very much to the lives of the children in their classrooms, and now they want to have a broader influence in the lives of more students and more people.
Now, I have a question to ask with regards to the leadership training. In the late 1980s, we began in business to change our style of business and managerial techniques from the dictatorial approach, so to speak, to the managerial approach, the teamwork approach.
Right.
And it seems one of the forerunners was G.E. Fanuc and others who created teams rather than having the pyramidal structure of information flowing from the top down.
Right.
The system of education is still that prior to 1960s mentality of that pyramidal structure where the information gets disseminated from the top down rather than the bottom up or anywhere in between. How do you prepare? I mean, we know that in business it hasn't worked. How are you preparing principals for the new types of leadership that are necessary for the 21st century skills?
Well, that's one of the reasons we spend so much time on group skills and learning how to work in teams. And one of my colleagues has been in community education for 20-some years, and he has gone around doing group trainings and interaction trainings and management trainings for a long time. And so we also create what we call actually we've adapted it from the folks at Stanford. It's called problem-based learning experiences and modules. And we create fairly complex and kind of messy problems for the students, and then they have to work in teams and in groups to create potential solutions for those problems. And sometimes they're themselves in those situations, and sometimes they're assigned roles. And we have had them play, students, ministers, board members, police officers, and all those kinds of things in some of these problem-based learning experiences to try to understand the perspectives of other people, and hopefully they learn to think a little bit outside the traditional model, and they come to value the other perspectives, and then when they move into a school setting of their own or become assistant principals or principals, then they've taken some of these values with them, and they try to set up more collegial models of operations, at least within their own schools. Lots of times this is filtered into the school divisions, but at least they can create more of that sense of community in their particular sites.
Now, is there any literature for our audience to read about problem-based learning, because it's really important as far as...
ASCD has, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development has what they call professional inquiry kits, and there's one called problem-based learning across the curriculum, and that's really also looking at problem-based learning.
So there's no book on the market that describes problem-based learning?
Yeah, there is. Hold on, let me see. I'm trying to remember what book is actually in this kit.
Our listeners aren't going to be able to go to Stanford University and go get a kit,
right,
or the Association for Curriculum Development.
Well, I've loaned the book to someone. Hold on. Let's see.
Was that ASCD?
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Association for School Curriculum Development?
It's the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development.
Okay.
And what I'm trying to do is they have a couple publications out now. And if I could just pull the name of one book, that would be good.
I'm sure you'll find it eventually.
Yes, that's always what happens. But and basically what it is the wording that they've now created for what we've already, I guess we've historically called experiential education. If you can create simulations and problem-based experiences, then you can move students from those which are fairly comfortable and they can fail without having dire consequences, and then move them into real-life settings where they can have experiences and take risks and learn from real problems and real issues in their local communities.
You haven't found that book yet?
Oh, no. Probably what I should have done before we set this up was to pull my library out.
That's all right. I'll have you look at it, but I'll let you skim while I talk about it. What it seems to me that we are looking for a new model, and in that model we are moving away from perhaps core curriculum, which is over 100 years old, and looking towards something and how we can determine something new for our students. Not that we should throw it out, however, utilize it in different ways, and integrated systems is one of the models. And problem-based learning is another, taking the problems of the community and developing curriculum around the problems of the community.
Right.
This is real-world information for our students, and definitely would be much better in terms of interest level, motivation, self-initiation, and as part of a community living, which you so aptly spoke about a little bit earlier. And that's why I was hoping you might have something for our readers, because I've been talking about problem-based.
I have a couple. The original book, which is primarily at the higher education level, is actually called Problem-Based Learning for Administrators, and it's by Bridges and Hallinger, and it was and Bridges is the person who's out of Stanford University. The one that's probably more related to primary and secondary education is by Robin Fogarty, Fogarty, and it's called Problem-Based Learning and Other Curriculum Models for the Multiple Intelligences Classroom. And those are just a couple that would give different perspectives and different age range foci.
That's great. Thank you so much. We are moving towards the end of our time here. And do you have a phone number where people can reach you? Shall I give them this number, your work number?
Okay. If they want to talk primarily about the school and the National Coalition of Alternative Community Schools and independent types of activities, then there's one phone number, and then if they want to talk more about leadership preparation, there's another phone number. Is that too confusing?
No. We'll do the leadership would be yours,
would be
I'm sure.
The work phone number.
540-231-9715.
Yes.
Again, that's 540-231-9715. And then the National Coalition for Alternative Schools.
Okay, that number would be the Learning Circle's phone number, which is 540-544-7645.
All right. And Tina, in our last few minutes, by the way, this is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. If you'd like to reach us with any questions, you may call us at 570-639-2931. Again, that's 570-639-2931. Tina, do you have any comments to wrap up the last 2 minutes of our broadcast? It's kind of a summation of everything we've talked about today.
I just think that it's really important for students to feel as if they're doing real things and to have lots of meaningful relationships with people and with the environment. And that if we can create situations where they have those kinds of experiences, then they will be enthusiastic about learning and about living and become lifelong learners. And that's really who are also very interested in making changes in the way that we interact and deal with one another. And I think that's an important goal for all of us.
Well, I appreciate your time today and taking out your time out of this busy day. You have been listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. talking about children, families, issues around it, and education, all kinds of issues around children. And we have been today with Dr. Christina Dawson from Virginia Polytech Institute and the State University in Virginia. If you'd like to speak with her, you can talk to her at 540-231-9715. That's 540-231-9715. And our number here is 570-639-2931. If you'd like to reach us at Children Come First, it's 570-639-2931. We thank you for joining us, and please join us again next week when we will be talking to some other interesting guests, talking about children and how we can help them in our environment and our schools. Thank you, and have a wonderful week.